All right, welcome to Faith Chats, where we talk about faith, family, freedom, and America. Episode where we confront one of the most urgent questions of our time: what happens to a nation when they turn their back on God? Our guest is my friend Matthew McWhorter, and he's a former atheist turned Catholic author and Planned Parenthood street counselor. His bold witness in legal matters shaking up the conversation on faith, violence, and biblical truth. Welcome to the program, my friend.
Thank you. God bless. Happy to be here.
So, as a former atheist who became a Catholic author and street counselor, what was the pivotal moment or encounter that shattered your atheism and drew you toward faith?
So, for me, it's a kind of a different story than that. I just wasn't raised religious at all. I just didn't care. But I had been named after the Bible. So my name's Matthew Mark, and I had massive health problems, heart attack and cancer, and was recovering from that. And people started asking me about my bucket list and the type of person I was. I had a list of books I wanted to read, and on it were the two that I was named for. And so I started reading, and my instead of one pivotal moment, it becomes years of research and reading and thinking about it. So I like myself, but I acknowledge that I'm not a normal person. So the normal story of the one great epiphany is not really mine. Mine is more of a very slow understanding of what Christianity is and what it's saying, and the dawning realization that Christianity explains the world so much better than all the things I had been relying on my whole life, philosophy and pop psychology and science, etc. That those things are only partial explanations, and the full explanation of what is wrong with this world and with humanity is really found in the Bible. And so, as I started reading this, I didn't expect that to be what I would read in the Bible. I discovered that's what it is. I started wondering, is that really true? I mean, it's a great story, but is the Christian story really true? And that's what led me into the research that ultimately led into my book. But it's a belief system that holds together very well and is evidenced in history, and that is the key for my conversion, was establishing that and coming to it. So for me, it was much a slower process. To give you just an example of how clueless I was, I didn't know why you go to church. Like I for the longest time, just as I was reading this, I think I was slowly becoming Christian in my head. But gee, on Sunday I should get up and go to church had not occurred to me, and it was a long way into the Bible before I realized, reading some of the epistles, of why we are a church and why you got to go to church. So it was that sort of growth that had to occur before my pivotal moment, if you want to call it that.
So, so how has that transformation shaped your daily work outside Planned Parenthood?
Oh, totally. I mean, of all the things I would never have expected to see myself doing, this is it, right? But it led me at so first, as I say, I had to get to church. Then when you're at church, there was a missionary effort, or I don't know, a calling that some people had to do this work, and they asked me if I would come out, and I came out one year, and the next year I came out again, and then they talked me into coming in once a month, and then now it's once a week, so I'm out there once a week. For me, as I say, because I'm not a terribly emotional person, so I didn't have you talk to people who have a very emotional Christian conversion or Christian experience, etc. For me, it's much more intellectual, and I am stubborn as a mule. So for me, my I end up being among the very last people there at the end of the day, at the clinic when you're there, because it is the bleakest time. You're not going to, the women have had their abortions, they're walking out. You're not going to persuade somebody. We try, and you occasionally do meet somebody in who's showing up for tomorrow's appointment, to get ready or whatever. But I mean, in general, it's a very bleak time, and a lot of Christians who are that sort of emotional thing, the emotional connection, the feeling of spirituality can leave them because it is so bleak. Whereas I made a mental decision, I'm going to be there and I won't quit because I'm stubborn. So that's the time that I'm there. It is, like you said, it's a very Bible driven purpose-driven type of activity. And I should say this: I recommend it to everybody. Come out. We need you. The women need you. The babies need you. Come out if you're able to talk to them. Some people can. Some people struggle with that sort of thing. If not, just pray. And we need groups. Yesterday we had a good crowd at the clinic. So come on out and join us.
So you described spending your days urging women to choose life. Can you
Yep.
walk us through what a typical encounter at the clinic would be like?
So for me personally, again, given how I did this, I sort of tried to think through what's the best way to appeal to these women. And talking about Christ doesn't necessarily work because they may not be Christian. Talking about God may not work because they may not believe in God. But everybody cares about their own medical safety. So I start with the medical discussion and try to grow from there if I'm getting some sort of positive signs or feedback, etc. And part of the shock of doing this is realizing how little thought and research and effort has gone into this by the people going into the clinic. So I'm there. I have a sign that says information, and I try to show people pictures of the ambulances that have been there while we were out there praying to take women away to the emergency room because things went badly. I have the Ohio Health reports of how the instruments in this particular facility were covered in dirt, for example. No one knows what I'm talking about. They've never heard any of these things. And you're trying to, this is all publicly available information. You can quickly find it. And yet you find that these people have not really thought about it. And that is some of the shocking piece of this to me as a Christian, as a person. And when we talk about sort of the decline of our society, what you would think is a monumental decision to possibly end something that might be a life. Maybe you don't think that, maybe that's not your ultimate conclusion, but that's what other people are claiming. That's the debate, right? Let's grant that maybe 1% of women have actually researched that, thought about that from a philosophical, theological, or even a medical perspective. 99% of these people, this baby is inconvenient and therefore they're going to kill it. And that is sort of a shocking thing to encounter, is how nonchalant human beings can be to such a thing. And if they have the slightest social cover for doing it, they will do it. And that is, man, that's horrifying to watch. And again, that's one of those things that the Bible details for us and tells us over and over. And in fact, I remember people used to have the bracelets. What would Jesus do? I sometimes wonder if we need bracelets that say what happened to Jesus. What would happen to Jesus? Because he was wrongly convicted of a crime he didn't commit, and people celebrated as he was tortured and executed. That's what happened to Jesus, and that is what humanity is really like. And we can kind of forget that. But at the clinic, I sort of confront that every day as you watch this. Is like human beings are really nonchalant about horror being visited on people that are not themselves.
So what keeps you returning even on the hardest days?
Yeah, that it's all, for me, it's all intellectual. It is the belief that Christianity is true, and therefore it's my duty, and therefore I shall do it. So it is just very intellectual combined with stubbornness that gets you out there, because it is, as I said, it's a bleak time at the end of the day, etc. But I view myself as sort of constitutionally better equipped to handle that than some of my other people out there on the sidewalk. So I just vowed that I would be the one that'll be there, and I'm not going to quit. So that's it for me. But it as I say, that itself is part of the spiritualness of it. As much as I'm pretending this is all intellectual, but there is a spiritual feeling of it because you're persevering. And all the things that Paul says about I finished the race. I feel all of that when I'm out there. I'm not going to quit. I will finish the race. Let's go.
So in the last couple of weeks, we faced the murder of Charlie Kirk, and you just recently wrote an op-ed about Benny Johnson. Share with us a little bit about that.
I don't remember writing an op-ed about Benny Johnson. There is another Matthew McWhorter out there, if you didn't know that. So that might be the other guy.
This was about a nation without God confronting America's moral collapse. Yeah.
Yeah. So in general, yeah, when I read the Bible, like the thing that sort of changed my own view of so much of things is realizing we have what a soul is, right? And
Right.
that we have a soul, that God loves you, that God has a plan, that there is a purpose to this universe, and that the spiritual world is actually the real world. And the physical world is the temporary condition that we're in during our lives. But in the afterlife, we will merge that with the spiritual world that's actually more real than the physical world. All of that, once I read the Bible, underlies many things, including like the Constitution and our civil rights. The reason why you care about the other person is because you see them as a soul. So you think about freedom of speech and Charlie Kirk and the ability to speak your mind. We protect that. We value that, even though someone says something we disagree with, we still believe that that's a right, and that person has every right to believe what they believe, etc. We cherish that as Christians because that person has a soul. When you encounter people who don't think in terms of souls, and I mean, these can be very polite, moral, ethical people in many ways, but that third rail of whatever happens, I'm still here to try to convince this guy to change and join us. I want Saul to become Paul. I want him to come join us. That doesn't necessarily exist in a person who doesn't believe in a soul. So to them, that person, like Charlie Kirk and his, the assassin's view of Charlie Kirk, that person's an obstacle. He's not a soul to be converted. He is an obstacle to be destroyed and eliminated. And that is part of the shocking collapse that I think is going on in our society, is the social belief in souls, which most people who are atheists are still Christianized, even though they don't believe in Christianity. They still hold values and philosophies and inconsistencies in their own head that are based off of the Christian history of our culture and our society and our nation. That is actually declining rapidly, and seeing that fracture and break is a huge part of what's going on out there, and why, without a return to God, I'm not sure how our society hangs together, because the historical belief that the other guy who disagrees with you is something to be destroyed is coming back. That tribalism that is all of human history is sort of coming back very nastily in our society right now.
So you've written a book called Cannon Crossfire. Share with us a little bit about the background of it.
Yeah. So if we think of the concepts that we're trying to convey in our society and get people to come join us, etc., we want to preach to them that we have the truth. And a key part of that is being willing to subject our own beliefs to the truth. And that piece of the argument is usually called the case for Christianity. And that case has, it's very compelling. It worked for me. I'm a lawyer, and I'm told lawyers actually convert at a higher rate than other professions. And some very famous lawyers in history have converted, including the guy who literally wrote the Book of Evidence. So this is the evidence is on the side of Christianity, and we try to show that through the case for Christ and prove that. However, being myself and how I converted, I was not being converted by a church or a person. I bought a box of Bibles off of Amazon, and the Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestants have 3 different Bibles. Even within Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox, I think they have different translations that they follow, and then everybody has different commentaries, to explain what a section means and what it's referencing and what's going on in it, etc. So I just bought a giant box of Bibles. I start reading them all, and I was addressing 2 questions at the same time: is Christianity true, and what is supposed to be the real Bible? And I realized there's a disconnect here. And I wanted to solve the question of whether or not we can really prove Christ, because so often in this debate over the canon, people are rejecting the evidence from the early church, while the case for Christ actually relies on the evidence from the early church. That's an inconsistency that has to be explained or justified. And the point of my book is to make it clear to people that is a problem that has to be, one way or another, no matter whoever you are and whatever you believe, you've got to address this problem, right? But I encountered a second problem, which is I just wanted to know, what did all the Christians of the early church say about these books that the Catholics accept and Protestants do not? And what I discovered is that no one had actually done the research to assemble all of those quotes. So that's essentially the core of my book, is this explanation of why it matters and why it's important, combined with all of the things that were ever said about these books in the first 450 years of Christianity. That, I didn't find new documents out in the desert or anything. What I did was I used the most scholarly database to go find all of these quotes from the early Christians, find where they're at, read the documents, bring the quotes in, present them in my book. A reader in a matter of a few hours can basically get up to speed as to what every Christian ever said about these books in the first 450 years of Christianity. That's the piece that didn't exist. It took me years of work. Now that I've done it, it's available for everybody, and it's the foundation that everybody should be using as we discuss what is the right Bible going forward.
So, what do you hope readers take away when reading Canon Crossfire?
Just as I say, that it's a question that has to be addressed, because if you truly want to prove that Christ rose from the dead, your opponent would in a real case would actually bring up this point that I'm making, which is, well, okay, you tell me, if you're a Protestant, you tell me that the Gospels are true and authentic because the early church said so. And then now let's look at these other books. What did the early church say on that? That is exactly the attack I would have made as a skeptic. And I'm a retired lawyer. As a professional arguer, that's where I would go straight for. And that element really hasn't been addressed in these other books, because people didn't address these two questions at the same time and didn't realize that they kind of overlap, and how the claims about the evidence can contradict themselves. So that's point one, is I hope people realize that this is important. The second thing is, this was once very hard to obtain this information. It is now very easy. You can find out whether, if you don't like what I'm saying and want to argue with me, you'd still want my book, because in a matter of a few hours, you're going to find out very quickly what everybody said. And that's the evidence we're going to argue over. Historically, that was hard to find. I did it. It's now available. Whatever people end up doing with it is up to them. But the point is, the research is available. So it's easily available. Research is the main point I'm trying to get out.
So, with the moral decline of America, where do you think the church is headed?
Boy, I don't know. It's that, you take comfort and faith when you read the Bible. You know that Jesus wins, God wins. It'll all work out in the end. But as you look back through history, etc., that doesn't mean that Christians always win. God the rain falls on the just and the unjust, and it doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to be smooth sailing. And I don't know. I feel like we're entering a time of persecution. These things come in cycles, and the cycle of going back to being a persecuted minority seems to be upon us. That's my guess. And as a result, I would imagine there's probably going to be, in some point in the 21st century, I think there will be a cleansing, as a lot of not very Christian people abandon our church, and just say it's not worth it. I don't want to be here anymore. And we become maybe a stronger church, but a much smaller church. That's my guess as to the future.
So, where do you think we can improve that?
Yeah, I feel like there's been an so who am I to complain? I wasn't raised terribly Christian, didn't know most of what Christianity is, but I'm astonished when I meet Christians and talk to them on the street. So few people really have looked into why we believe what we believe, what is really in the Bible, etc. And just on the topic of abortion, for example, there are clear condemnations of abortion in the Old Testament, and then there are 5 New Testament references that appear to be condemning abortion, and virtually no one knows about that. And it's kind of shocking that there are so many Christians that you encounter on the street who don't realize, they don't even really care what the Bible had to say. They view abortion as fine, so therefore it must be fine, without even bothering to research and look at it. To me, that's the stuff we got to clean up, is, reminding people what the Bible says, focusing on what our beliefs are, why we believe them, what grounds them, etc. is the sort of education that seems to have been lost. And there's a whole lot of, just assuming that everything that you want is what Jesus would want. And actually the real answer is to go find out what Jesus wanted and then do it.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for your time. For more information
Thanks, sir.
about you, I encourage people to visit your website, canoncrossfire.com.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your time.
Thank you.